Turn on my light here. Yeah, now we're live. What's going on? So tonight in this episode, we are going to talk about dual runner intake manifolds. I just now posted up a video on the testing that I did on the Ford Racing, the FR500 intake manifold, which is very cool for a number of reasons. It's magnesium, which is very lightweight, feels like it's going to float away. And it is obviously dual runner. It's fairly rare too, which is kind of cool, which, you know, if you open the hood and you have a 4-valve Cobra or any sort of 4.64 valve powered vehicle, and you have that manifold instead of a, you know, standard kind of Cobra deal, it's cool. But the question is, for you guys, what do you think about these dual runner intakes? I've run lots of tests on them, and I listed a few there, the GSR, the Integra stuff, which seems to be not nearly as popular as the Type R manifold for all the B series guys out there. The go-to one was kind of the Type R over the P30, despite the fact, like when I did testing, nobody, and I was surprised when I did this, nobody had ever tested this or hadn't seen it. Nobody had ever like actually done a back-to-back test of the P30 B16 intake manifold versus the Type R. And on a B16, the Type R actually loses power through most of the curve. Short runner, you know, go figure. But the GSR was a dual runner manifold. The Barra obviously has that too. No, I haven't tested that yet. Obviously, we're looking forward to doing that. And I'm told on the Barra that it is a dual runner, which is good, which is a long and short kind of thing, typical deal to change the effective operating range. That's what all these manifolds are doing, changing the effective operating range where they're going to optimize power production. But I've been told on the Barra, and I haven't flowed this yet, and I'm going to when I go down, that manifold actually is also restrictive relative to the cylinder head. So we now know what the head flows. So I also want to flow test the manifold to see if indeed the manifold is restrictive in terms of airflow. Now the runner length is not airflow; it's a reflected wave, so it's a pressure wave. But if the manifold doesn't flow well, then it's also not going to support the power. So it might be a good application for the guys at Extrudo, and I might have to call those guys. The 5.7 Hemi, that video is up as well. It's the later Hemi. I call it a Gen 4. And we ran the 5.7 with the new heads, Eagle heads, or I think they're Eagle heads. And we ran the dual runner intake manifold, and it definitely works. Like these others, you know, the short runner one makes more power at top, and the long runner one makes more down low. And if you switch it at the right point, you get a good crossover, and you get the best average power for both of those. So that it's kind of cool. And the interesting thing, and one thing that a lot of guys don't realize is that this still works under boost. A lot of people think that you don't, it's a short runner, I don't need, I'm running boost. I can run any kind of manifold. And a lot of guys even think, this is better. I can run a short runner manifold and get all that boost to the valve immediately because that's what's going to make power. But again, that reflected wave happens whether there's boost in there or not. So longer runner manifolds still do what longer runner manifolds do under boost. And in the case of a turbo, this can be really beneficial because if you're running boost and you have this long runner manifold, then you can have lots more low speed or somewhere, low to mid-ish power production. And that enhances turbo spool up. So if you can enhance the turbo spool up, you basically get this multiplier effect. So if you have, having the extra power from the longer runner length is good, but if it spools the turbo up faster, all of a sudden, instead of no boost or a couple of pounds of boost, all of a sudden you have 7 or 8 or 10 or whatever the number is. That's going to be a big change in power on a turbo application if you're able to spool it earlier because you had the right runner length or a dual runner manifold in this. So if you guys have seen them, seen the video that I just posted or any of the other ones, I'm hoping you guys have watched all of the videos on the channel. You should have. If you haven't, shame on you. There's lots of stuff there. But these manifolds do work very well. All of the ones I listed, obviously, I've tested, except for the Barra so far. But I do want to test that, which is why, and these dual runner manifolds are why I do these adjustable manifolds when I make them. Like I made one for the Atlas motor, and we're going to run that. And I by the way, now that I've mentioned Atlas, I got a message from Calvin earlier today about him running 26 pounds on an untouched 4200. So It hasn't been opened up. It doesn't have head studs. It doesn't have different gaskets. You know, it obviously has enough injector to support that power level, but he's ran 26 pounds on it, and it made really good power. As a matter of fact, I'll see what, if you guys haven't taken a look at that video, you need to take a look at it, and I'll see what he was making fairly good power too. Let's see. So stock untouched. He's also running an air-to-water intercooler, which I think is a good idea. We use that a lot. 605 wheel horsepower. So that's up there pretty good. That's got to be 700 or more at the flywheel, depending on what drivetrain he's using and what dyno he's measuring it on. But it's an 08 motor, 100% stock. I don't even think it has... It does have an air to water. I don't think it has. I asked him if it had stock springs and gaskets and head bolts and all that. And he said, yeah, all of that stuff is stock. So the only thing he did was paint the valve cover. So I said, you need to package that paint and make that the 26-pound like valve cover paint, because apparently that's all he did was take the valve cover off and paint it so that it looked cool. And I'll have to see, he sent me a picture of it. Yes, it's red. So it's basically the 4200 Type R version. So way to go, Calvin. Awesome job. This thing had 175,000 miles on it. So it's doing good. He did say that it was getting into maybe a little bit of breakup on the ignition coils. And he brought the plug gap down to 20 thousandths, which is cool. He's thinking that the coils might not be as good as the LS stuff. So maybe a coil upgrade may be in order. So, you know, that might be cool. And I suggested to him that he can go down in plug gap even more, down into the teens, if that helps with the thing. The other thing that you can do is, and we've done this before on applications, we've done it on modular Fords, and we basically hooked a Kenny Bell boosted pump up to increase the supply voltage to the coils. And if you do that, the output of the coil is a function of the input voltage and then the windings and stuff, and then which act as a multiplier. So if you increase the supply voltage to the coil, you can increase you can increase the voltage supply, the output. And obviously, might also be nice to be able to change the dwell, which we do on the standalone systems. So that might give us a little bit more of an edge. But you know, it looks like maybe at some point a coil upgrade might not be a bad idea on the 4200. But and I got off on a tangent there. We're talking about intake manifolds, but I made an adjustable intake manifold for the 4200. And the reason that I did that is because you see in these dual runner intakes kind of offer whenever I do an adjustable and we make long runners and go, oh, look at all that torque. And then we do short ones and go, hey, look at all that power. And then we always say, wouldn't it be nice to have all of that? And that's to some extent what these dual runners. Now, obviously a dual runner intake is only going to do so much. The optimum thing would be to have a sliding trumpet and be able to adjust it so that you optimize the power production and the reflected wave and all the different, not only different RPM ranges, but different throttle angles and stuff too. And that sort of stuff has been done out there at the OEM or for instance, Formula One. They've done that sort of stuff, and the Mazda, the four-rotor Mazda from Le Mans and stuff, and so that stuff has all been done. None of this is new. It's all very old hat, but it does improve the power output quite a bit. So that video on the modular Ford is up, and also, as I mentioned in the video, if you guys have not seen that, I'm going to offer that FR500 intake manifold up for sale, although it's not cheap. I did some research on them, and I cannot, which is why I'm selling it, because it's just sitting around right now. And I can't believe some of the prices that some of those things are selling at. So I'm going to get rid of mine and use the money to apply it to all of the many projects that I have, and hopefully get some of those things done too. So that's my spiel on adjustable runners. I like them. They work well. In the case of the FR500, actually the FR500, and I've done this testing on milder applications, and the combination of the two actually didn't work quite as well in terms of mid-range power compared to the factory Cobra manifold. But the nice thing is, and as I showed in this video that I just posted, like the top end charge on the short runner on the FR500 was just dramatically better than the factory manifold. And then you also have the extra torque offered by the long runner. It's just not quite as great as the torque production of the factory 4-valve Cobra intake manifold. And the one that we tested against actually had been ported also. So it might have been a little bit better than a stock one. So if you want a good, your 6,500 RPM motor, let's say on a 4-valve Cobra, the factory manifold works fairly well. But if you're doing more than that, and as I showed here, like we wanted to run to 7,500 or even 8,000, we were thinking, but I ran into a valve spring problem. But we were doing it because we had a centrifugal supercharger and trying to make a lot of power. We wanted to make a lot of power first NA, and then we wanted to be able to have that RPM potential with the centrifugal blower, because as you go up in RPM, you go up in blower speed, you go up in boost, and you go up in power, and all of that stuff works magically together, which is why we were trying to do that. The one thing we didn't do is put enough valve spring. Nick, what's going on? Hey, Richard, sorry for being off topic, but I've been meaning to ask how much max lift on a bone stock Ford 460 can I get away with? Nick, it's never maximum lift. The thing that's going to limit lift on a Ford is probably going to be the stock valve spring. You're going to run into coil bind. Then it's probably going to be the retainer to seal clearance. So you got to figure out what that is. The maximum lift for piston to valve is usually not an issue. That's almost always duration, and it's almost always intake duration. So you get to a point where normally with a lot of these motors, it's somewhere in the 230 degree at 50 range. So it's not how far you're hanging or you're opening the valve. It's how long you're hanging it up there, because that's when the piston's coming up. When the piston and the valve intersect each other, that's when you have a problem. The valve doesn't just open and go down and hit a stationary piston. It's not lift. It's duration. All of this stuff is moving. So if you hang the valve down there long enough, the piston has enough time to come up and hit it. And that's usually what happens there. So usually it's more duration than it is lift. So let's see. Peak EGT happens at peak torque, though. People, please touch the like. People, definitely, please touch the like button. Let me know. I want you guys to chime in. Have you guys watched the FR500 intake manifold test? And do you want to see more multiple runner, dual runner? A triple runner one would kind of really be cool. And I've never seen a triple runner intake manifold from the factory, but I have seen dual runner intakes that also have dual plenums. So that they have dual runners, and then they also have a valve in between the plenums. This was done on a 6-cylinder, and they also have a valve in between the plenums that allow it to cross-communicate or not cross-communicate, because they're trying to enhance power production that way as well, which is kind of cool. All of that induction theory stuff is just fascinating to me, and it was cool to go back and read some technical books on some of the things that were tried and some of the examples that they used to show, hey, look, here's what happens when you do this, and here's like a real world application where the OEMs actually did this, because contrary to what people think, the OEM engineers are actually really, really sharp. I want to see some NOS with ITBs. You can do that fairly easily, but you have to do it as a individual fogger system. And usually the problem, well, there's not a problem with that, but the issue with that is depending on how much power you want to add, because you have to jet the thing so far down. Like if you want to add 200 horsepower on a V8 and you have to have a fogger for each cylinder, then you have to have jetting that only is going to supply 25 horsepower. And the problem with jetting to supply only 25 horsepower with a nitrous is that the orifice gets really, really small. And then you run into problems with it freezing and clogging and stuff. Or if you have any debris in there, you run a clogging issue. 25 horsepower seems to kind of be, down around the smallest scale that guys use for stuff like that. And then obviously, if you're going to add 50 horsepower per runner, then on a V8, that turns into a lot of power. And so the motor has to be able to support that. The GTR has dual tube plenum and Ron crossover tube. Yeah, that's fairly common for them to do that. Hey, Richard, how did you get a hold of the Bear in the USA? That was imported. And I'm going to tell you where that came from. Here we go. Let's see. There we go. This came from, and I need to write this down. Dominator Motorsports Australia is the name of the importer that brought that in and let me use one. So that's those guys are good guys. They got a lot of stuff for bearers, apparently more than just the importer, more than just importing the motor. They've got a lot of other cool things, which we're going to be employing when we run that thing. So that will be good. And thanks to the guys there that did that. That was awesome. Yeah, I agree, Mike. I like the adjustable runner stuff. I always try to do that. And even if I have to go over there and hold them by hand, like the one thing that I did, and I didn't put it in this video, but one of the things that we did on this FR500 that's also possible is you can run the long runner, you can run the short runner, and then you can pull the lid off while you're running the short runner. And then all of a sudden, it's not a common plenum anymore. Now it's an individual runner manifold. So in doing that, it did pick up power as an IR manifold as well, which is another kind of cool test. Slant 6, we like that. We got more slant 6 stuff coming. The LaFerrari uses a truly infinite variable length, right? Well, the length can't vary infinitely, so it can't be 1,000,000 miles long, but it can adjust within a certain range, I'm sure. Let's see. Richard, suggestions on unique but still powerful engine swaps. Not an LS, not a 2J, a Coyote, but still neat and makes good power. What is it going in? Let's see, because that would tend to steer me toward what kind of motor I put in. Like if it's going in a big heavy truck, I would pick something different, like a Cadillac, for instance, might be a good application for that. If it's going in a lightweight car, a little twin cam Toyota might be good, or a rotary. So unique is really cool, but it should still suit the application. You shouldn't try to put a naturally aspirated rotary motor in a big, heavy four-wheel drive truck. It's just not going to work very well, as cool as we might think it is. It's just not going to work as well. So if you let me know what you're trying to do with it, and then we can maybe steer you in the right direction. The 4.6 2-valve modular Ford truck manifold, not the one that they used in the Mustang, but the one that they used in the trucks, had a dual plenum divider that they actuated during, and it's actually at fairly low RPM where they picked up some fairly decent amount of torque. Yeah, the Ferrari Formula One motors had telescopic stacks, and they would not just vary it with RPM, they'd also vary it with other things too. And as it goes through the RPM, you can raise and lower it, because what you're having is it's producing a sine wave. So what you're wanting to do is have this thing be at the top of each one of those sine waves through the RPM range. So if you can raise and lower it, you can basically, what you're doing is kind of shifting that sine wave. So, okay, we're on the top, we're on the top, we're on the top, we're on the top. And that doesn't always happen at the longest runner length. A VWW6, that would be out of the ordinary, certainly. I have a draw-through turbo off an 80 Trans Am. I have not found one to test. The problem with that draw-through turbo on the Trans Am is that it's fairly small, and it's not going to support a lot of power. So you have to run it on a fairly mild motor. And I honestly think, and I haven't tried this yet, I think we can just run one of these turbos that I have as a draw-through turbo, even without doing a carbon seal update on it. I think we could just do it, and it doesn't have to last very long. Jory, I wasn't talking about, if the question is for me, his question is, were you talking about dry or wet nitrogen? I wasn't talking about nitrogen. I was talking about nitrous oxide. And actually, it doesn't matter whether the fogger system also has fuel, which is kind of typically the case. You could do just nitrous, but even if you did just nitrous in each one of the cylinders, it's still going to have jetting for a very small amount, which means it's going to have to be very small. I drove a 301 turbo Trans Am, and it felt like Nate, nice. Buick Series 23800. I'd like to do one of those. I happen to have one of those. Yeah, sometimes, Mike, it's actually fitment that causes what you can do, what you can't do. BMW did a cool one. They did kind of a snail, a scroll that is rotating, which is a way to package a lot more length in it. Have you seen those Cadillac Batwing or whatever it's called turbo motors? I don't know what that is. The LT-based V6 is a good one. I do want to do stuff with that. The Grand National Trans Ams were faster than the Grand Nationals. I would agree with that. They're certainly more aerodynamic. Oh, it's going in a Dodge Stealth. A Dodge Stealth is already kind of an other guy's motor, because a lot of guys will do the Nissan ones, and a lot of guys obviously will do the Toyota 6 cylinders. But those Dodge Stealth motors made lots of power. Current has heads cam, LS1, T56, but I'm kind of over it. Maybe a V6, maybe some other kind of V6, or a big 4-cylinder. If you wanted to do something weird, do the big block Ford headed 3.7 liter inline 4-cylinder, maybe, and that would definitely be different. How about a 426 Heavy and a 76 Honda Civic? I'd just like to have the 76 Honda Civic. I'd like to have a little turbo Honda motor in that 76 Civic. I have tested the magnesium FR500 intake. That's the manifold. I have other tests up on it, other videos up on it, but that's the manifold that I just posted another video just like a half an hour ago. And it was a dual runner intake manifold, the magnesium FR500. I want to see more BMW motor swaps or Mitsubishi engine swaps. Those are good. Yes, the Turbo Trans Ams were real impressive. I raced against those in my supercharged Mustang, and they were pretty sporty. Yeah, the Mercedes ones would be good too. I wish that somebody came up with a package that was inexpensive, fuel injection setup, to like a standalone deal to run those, to put those in something that would kind of be cool. I always wanted one of the big twin turbo Mercedes sedans so I could be gangster. Let's see, a bit off topic. High overlap cams and true twin scroll setups. Is there actually a benefit? Datsun L6 2.8 liter in particular. I don't know how those things would go together. I don't know how the high overlap is going to be affected by. I think that the twin scroll is going to might be beneficial just by itself, by having half of the exhaust go to one side and half of the exhaust go to the other. Depending on the firing order, that itself might be beneficial. I don't really understand how the overlap is going to make that more or less beneficial, but I've never tried that. The Ford Focus doesn't have a variable length one, but the SVT version does. The common ZTEC one just has a really long intake runner. And on the book that I wrote on the Ford Focus stuff, I did a lot of testing on that, and that manifold makes a lot of torque. A new Hemi might be good, unless you really want to be different. Could someone make a set of variable length exhaust headers to accomplish the same thing as an intake manifold? Well, if you take a look at the video that I think I put the video up of the adjustable headers that I made to find out if that was going to happen. And in the I've done this before many times, but in the application that I did it didn't make it nearly as much of a difference as I thought it was going to. Yeah, I like some of the lesser big blocks. Everyone wants me to do a 455 shootout like the Buick Pontiac 455s, and that would be cool. if this was 20 or 30 years ago when I could just go grab all of those and they were all readily available. And we all have to remember that there's a lot of bad mouthing on the Turbo Trans Am, but we also all have to remember that what that thing was compared to back in the day. Back in the day, there wasn't a lot of 3 or 4 or 5 or 600 horsepower motors. So if you had 200, I mean, look at a 5-liter Mustang. It revolutionized the industry, I think, and it made 225 horsepower. So a Turbo Trans Am was not too bad back in its day. Now it's not. We have 250 or 300 horsepower V6s now. Does manifold volume matter on a boosted? Well, if you look at the gigantic plenum volume I did when I did the Keglodon, the plenum volume didn't seem to make a big difference. Do larger core spark plug wires really make a difference on LS engines from stock? I would say no. I haven't seen a difference in spark plugs other than having a burnt one or a bad one that's damaged or bent or broken. I don't think that they carry, or that if they can carry more spark energy. I don't think that you're at the area where that becomes beneficial. Mike, this is all of this reflected wave stuff is all old school organ pipe theory that predates the internal combustion engine by, thousands of years. I've got an 81 Pontiac Firebird Formula 4.9 turbo. Did they put the turbo motor in also in the Firebird Formula, not just the Trans Am? That's very cool. How would a turbo and a Bosch CIS work together? Didn't they use that on the 944 or 924 turbo? I thought that they used that. I thought they combined those. Aaron, did you see the intake pictures? Yeah, I did see the pictures of the intake that you sent. Dan, if you build a slant 6, please find a way to make actual power. The build's barely top 200. Sometimes it's hard to get that unless you do boost. Yeah, the Dodge Stealth twin turbo, it was very packed and very busy under the hood. We always used to joke that you could flip a quarter in there and it would never hit the ground because it was just full of stuff. And it was a fairly small V6, but it had a lot going on. But like I said, they made lots of power when you wick those things up. Yeah, take a look at somebody tell M-Do8 what what's the name of the 3.7 liter 4-cylinder that runs the Ford big block cylinder head on it. I can't remember the name of it. Yeah, I don't remember the last time I saw a 1976 Honda Civic driving around. I like the small, tiny Civics. ITBs with a torque storm. The problem is that you can run boost on ITBs, but then they become not ITBs anymore. If you put a common plenum on them, which you have to do to house the boost to get boost to all of the individual runners, they're not really ITBs anymore. The Lincoln Aviator, yes, I've tested that intake manifold. I have that video up, and it does have dual runners as well. Yeah, Tom, air shocks were really big. As a matter of fact, the first Camaro I bought had air shocks on it. I eventually took them off and put conies on it because mine was lowered with springs and shocks and sway bars and all that stuff. But before that, it had air shocks on it. The thing that was nice about air shocks is that if you had 4 people in a Camaro, which the poor people in the back seats that was terrible. But you could put air pressure to the air shocks, and then you could get the ride height back up, and it wasn't dragging anything. So it was kind of like active suspension. Have you seen a diesel pump UK quick spool valve? I'm familiar with quick spool valves, but I don't usually watch the diesel stuff that much. I do like watching the destruction videos. Those are kind of cool. Yeah, the 89 Trans Am was definitely faster than my Mustang was. Tipsy, you got your turbo Ford 300. Nice. 10 pounds. It should be good. Leaks a lot of oil. If it came from a wrecking yard, that's par for the course. $350 in the Monte Carlo in 1980 was $150. So when did they bring out the HO 305, which was 190 horsepower? That thing was actually fairly good. It was the L69, I think. You can use a quick spool valve on a gas engine. Jory, you say you have seen gains on the boosted application. I assume you're talking about plenum volume. Wouldn't a smaller plenum work? I haven't seen anybody show me where they don't change anything else. Well, all they change is plenum volume, and don't change the tune, don't change the boost level, don't change anything. Just change the plenum volume, and I want to see what it does and how it does that. That would be a good test. Dan, do a firing order swap on tri-Y headers versus long tube headers? I'm wondering how the firing order will affect the exhaust scavenging between the two. That would be an interesting thing to see if the change in firing order changes the scavenging on the different style headers. The test that I really want to do with headers is a boosted test, and I want to run a positive displacement blower with a short runner manifold like a Kenny Bell or something, and then run a long runner manifold with boost with a Vortec, and then test stock exhaust manifolds versus headers. And I could do that NA as well on a short runner manifold and a long runner manifold, and do it NA as well, and see if the gains from the headers change with the change in runner length from the intake manifolds. I'm curious about that, but that's also a good idea to see if changing the firing order. The problem is changing the firing order is fairly involved because you got to change the camshaft. It was an option in 1980 and 1981 for the 4.9 liter turbo formula. Nice. I like that. That's very cool. For the 5.4, have you ever checked the amount of horsepower loss using adapter plates on a 4.6 valve intake versus the 5.4 2V truck versus a split and widened 4.6 Victor Jr.? I've never run a Victor Jr. intake on the modular ones. All the testing I had, that intake wasn't available yet. Can you use an adapter to put a 4.6 valve intake manifold on it? And I would be curious about the adapter situation, whether that part of it is actually going to lose power. The 4.6 valve intake, the PI intake, for instance, obviously was designed for a 4.6 and not for a 5.4. I would think that a 5.4 intake might be better, but I've never run that test. I'd like to run the Victor Jr. intake manifold on one of those modular Ford applications, because I just want to see how much power it loses. I've run lots of short runner intakes on 4.6 valve motors and 4.6 valve motors. If you take a look, I've got videos up showing all the different intake manifolds on the modular Ford stuff. And a short runner intake, like a Victor Jr., always loses low speed power. But I'd be interested to see exactly what the Victor Jr. does, because I've never run one. A 3.5 twin turbo Ecoboost, which those are very impressive motors. We've run those on the chassis dyno, but I've never run them on the engine dyno. We normally run the coil wire, shadow ops. We normally run the coil wires that come from the junkyard if they're still good. But there is a difference between the length of the wires for a truck application or for a car application, depending on which coil packs you're using. Yes, the Mercury Marine 3700. The 470 is the 3.7 liter. Okay, the Mercruiser, yeah. The Dodge Stealth is the Mitsubishi GTO. That's good. So in the Chevy Sonic, the plastic manifolds go away with heat. I would think that is it more the engine compartment heat rather than the boost heat? PvP. So how much bad news? And I've yet to see data to back it up. What is that in response to? Yeah, I haven't tested the adapters, so I don't know. I don't know how good they are, how bad they are. I have tested lots of other adapters on things, like lots of the LS stuff, and it's not worked out very well. The one area that I did, the one intake test that I did, where adapters actually worked very well, were on the tall deck RHS block that I use, running LS7 manifolds. That seemed to work fairly well. It's just a straight shot, and also on all of the what do we run adapters on? Oh, the 400 Ford, the 400M Ford, running the 351 Cleveland manifolds on that with just basically what are just spacers. They're all straight adapters. Specs of the highest horsepower NA modular you've ever tested. I don't know what that is. I don't think it's a lot. I think it's going to be in the 500 horsepower range. It's not going to be a ton. Julius, I am going to probably sell the FR500, but not to you because it's going to be way more money than you're going to want to pay for it. Guys are offering really big money for it. And the other thing I asked is if anybody had anything cool that they wanted to trade for it, like the two things I threw out there, a Dodge Omni GLH Turbo, which would be awesome, or a Mazda 323 GTX, which obviously that would never happen. Have you ever tested any of the Ford Duratec stuff, 4 or 6 cylinder? On the chassis dyno we have, the guys at the show shop used to use that. They used to upgrade the bottom end of the SVT contours with a 3-liter bottom end. So they basically did a stroker version of the 2.5 and made it a 3-liter with all of the SVT contour top end stuff, which I thought was really cool because, you know, more torque is always better. And they had ported heads and cams and things for them. So actually they were pretty sporty back in the day. Julius, I've never run adapters that I can remember trying to put. The adapters that I did run, I take that back. You're right, Julius. The adapters that I did run were from the guys at CarCraft. And they were adapters, though, to go from the modular Ford and allowed me to put 302, like 5-liter based intake manifolds on there. But they didn't work very well. Those adapters were not ideally suited. The modular intake manifolds did better than the adapted 5-liter manifolds, even though the manifolds did very well on the 5 liters. So the adapters changing from that conventional 5-liter rectangular shape to the modular Ford, it was not great. But I've not done a 5.4 to 4.6 2-valve intake manifold adapters. I haven't done that, though. Yes, the air shocks are good until you lose a line and stuff, because that's usually what happens is that debris and stuff will take a line out and they'll crack and break, and then you don't have and usually it's just one side. So you got like the gangster lean, you got it sagging on one side. Let's see, 5-liter Ford F-150 wanting low-end torque for towing. Saw yesterday's video about the 4.8. Have new trans for the 600 horsepower. I'm thinking twin GT35s for fast spool at low RPM. Am I correct? I don't know if twin GT35s are going to spool as fast as you want it, depending on what power output. If you're looking for 600 horsepower, a single GT35 or something just slightly bigger than that, like an S362 or 66 or something like that. Oh, if you want to adjust the header to change the scavenging effect by effectively changing the firing order in the exhaust, you can do that. I thought you were talking about like the 4.7 cam swap on a small block Chevy or something similar on a Ford. Yes, every Chevelle Route 666 had every Chevelle had air shocks on it, and most of the guys when I was growing up, most of the guys in my high school, almost all of them had air shocks because they like the rake. You know, they want to jack it up, put big meats in the back because to get the thing to hook up and stuff. I more cared about the thing. Like I lowered mine, put conies on it, put some WS6 Trans Am sway bars on it, put big block springs that we cut down. I got Z28 leafs on it, and I did all that stuff because I was back going through the curvy roads and stuff. The 3800 is not up and running yet. I'm back at home, so I'm not doing any work on it right now. Yeah, a lot of our stuff is rebadged in the US compared to what it is in Rob's talking about in New Zealand. Some of these Mustang guys have been putting twin turbos on their 5 liters to make series power. You can make lots of power with the twin turbo. It's just that if you're going for 1,000 horsepower, you have to juggle. There's always an adjustment or a juggling between response rate and maximum power. And the bigger the motor is and the more powerful the motor is, the less of a trade-off there are between those two things. Excuse me. On a heads up with the barrel manifold, the butterflies can become an issue with boost. Make certain to put Loctite on the blade screws or they may end up in the engine. That's not good. Thanks, Joyce, for the heads up. Yeah, we've the coil issue. The different coils that you use have different length wires. Kyle's here. Glad you could make it. Oh, the little Chevy, the intake leaks at the seams. Okay. Got my Boss 290 carbon art intake manifold. The Boss 290 intakes are very cool. Did you ever see the Ford four-cylinder that fit a small block Ford head? It was used in sprint cars. I do remember reading a story about that. If the V6 is good enough for the Ford GT40, it's good enough for me. Let's see some Saturns. I used to race against the Saturns. The ICY Intercity Youth Team sponsored some Saturns back in World Challenge, and they were pretty sporty. The front-wheel drive versus rear-wheel drive, how do you play in determining which turbo you use? It wouldn't for me. Mine would still be the amount of power that you're trying to make. And then putting that power down might be different. I don't know. Maybe guys would adjust to determine whether or not they wanted to hurt something on the launch. But for me, that wouldn't be a consideration. Do you have any 70 to 90 pound US car injectors around? I don't think I do. I think I had one set of 80s that went with a motor that I sent out. And then I think that the next step up that I have is 1500s. I think that they're the ones that the guys from Snake Eater sent me. Switch from a sheet fabricated deep motor 1 or 2 throttle body down to a fast 92 millimeter on my mile 370 from the seat of pants. I don't think it lost anything possibly gained and haven't tuned it yet. From a sheet metal fabricated, I don't know what deep motor means, Dominic. If you're changing the runner length from a fabricated manifold, like the ones that guys the sniper style manifold is a perfect example. If you went from that to a fast manifold, you definitely picked up low speed power. As a matter of fact, you picked up power all the way to 6,000 or more, and you wouldn't lose anything from that. What compression ratio would be your limit before you wouldn't want to add boost? I wouldn't. That's a loaded question. It's going to depend on your octane and what you're doing with it. If it's an all-out drag race thing, guys run 12, 13, 14 to 1 compression with boost because they're trying to make all the power that they can, and that's a good way to do it. But if you're talking about running it around on pump gas, then I wouldn't run those kinds of static compressions with boost. Keep it in the range that most normal motors are, because you can make more power than you need, even if you have lower compression. So if you're in the 9 to 10 to 1 range, that kind of seems to be the sweet spot. Possible power gain going smaller. I don't know what you mean by smaller. The throttle body size is not going to do anything if this is under boost. Is this under boost? The Coyotes make good power. There's no doubt about that. Problem with air shocks in the 70 Camaros and Firebirds is they go through the shock mounts. Yeah. Let's see. Where's my in general question? In general, where do you find the sweet spot for turbos horsepower ratings? If it's rated for 1,000 horsepower, what would be a good power level for peak efficiency? I think you can't judge that. If you can look at the compressor map, you can see where that is. And what you'll find is a 1,000 horsepower turbo. That 1,000 horsepower rating is like a maximum flow rating. It's not going to be anywhere near the maximum efficiency area. It's going to be way out to the outside. I'm doing a video, or going to do a video on compressor maps, and you'll see what that is. So if like an S475, where you're making 1,000 horsepower, where all these guys are maxing these turbos out, isn't anywhere near the peak island of efficiency. That's going to be more like 600 horsepower. Can I send my 13 to 1 compression 5.3 cam or 5-liter engine to you for testing top with my own FR500 intake manifold? It sounds like you probably have already tested that. Don't you? Probably already know what it does, right? The horsepower rating never makes sense to me. Why not market CFM and boost? Never understood how horsepower becomes a factor. Because you can make that same power with different levels of boost. And so you can have 1,000 horsepower S475, and it can make 1,000 horsepower on lots of different size NA motors that you're starting with that would require different boost levels to make that same power output. The turbo will flow that, and it will make that power. And a lot of guys the only thing that they go by, I have to see a compressor map. I have to read a compressor map. What they don't realize is that's not really totally necessary. Yeah, Mark, unfortunately, I don't think I have either one of those. I don't remember seeing any 70s. And I know I don't have any 90s. The 1500s would be the only thing I have, and everything else is going to be probably much smaller than that. How effective is an intercooler if you're already running E85? After watching Engine Masters episode, it only showed to be a degree difference on a supercharger. You're still changing the air temperature going in, even with E85, unless you're injecting that E85 where it has a chance to cool the charge temperature. You're not cooling the charge temperature. You're only squirting it in at the very last second. So the amount of time it has for cooling is not nearly as much. Lots of guys don't run. They run E85, or certainly when they run methanol, they don't run intercoolers. I like having an intercooler. If you measure the charge temperature in the manifold when you're running 20 pounds of boost, after you do that, you'll want an intercooler. Superchargers are always marketed for CFM and liters, which makes perfect sense. I just don't see that. A 671, different 671s will support different power levels. So again, I like doing it based on power because that's what everybody cares about. And so that's how I rate superchargers. A D1SC, I don't rate that based on airflow and boost. I know what the maximum output is of a D1SC, and I know what the maximum output is on an F1A 94 and different other blowers. And so I look at it as this blower can support 1,000 horsepower or 1,500 or 2,000 or 600, whatever the number is. And then if, like, for instance, a torque storm is a perfect example. That's like a 700 to 750 horsepower blower. That's what it will do. And you can do that on a 408. You can do that on a 6-liter or a 5.3 or a 4.8. And it will do that. It will support that. It has that much airflow to support that much power. And how you get it there with these different displacements is going to determine where it does that at the different boost levels. So everyone can do it their own way. If it works for you, it works for you. That's fantastic. How do turbo motor builds affect longevity of the motor? Well, the factory does OEM turbo motors, and they have very long warranties on them. So if you have the air, fuel, and timing right, it probably should work fairly well. What I would say to that is most guys don't run. If you add a turbo to your motor, like if you go to the wrecking yard and get a motor and put a turbo on it, you shouldn't care about longevity. You're not going to be running that motor for 100 or 200,000 miles. You're going to break it because of tuning. You're going to get rid of it. You're going to put something else in. And if you had to, and you had to go get another 250 horsepower or $250 junkyard motor, that's not a big deal. People worry about that, but I don't think that they should, because not very many people I know have ever tested something like that for longevity. Julius, yes, on the gaskets. I don't have an intake gasket, and a head gasket would be good, only because I don't think I can get it here. Mike, do you think you can really get one of those Regals with a 3.8 draw through? Can you still pick those up cheap? I thought that any sort of G-body thing was like big money anymore. We need a 4-liter single overhead cam Big Bang. Which, are you talking about the 4-liter single overhead Canberra motor or a Ford, or which motor is that? Nick, everybody picks the wrong cam. I do apparently every test that I do, I pick the wrong cam. Casey, I want to build a Crown Vic PI with V10 because I need a car that will do 150. That's just boost away. That's really easy. Even in a 4.6 2-valve non-PI motor, if you just add boost to it, it will easily go 150. The GT45 is terrible because it only makes 800 horsepower. I know. That's terrible power for $160. Demon Tech, you have an 86 Grand National and an 89 Grand Prix. Nice. Grand Prix Turbo. Biggest cam and the biggest turbo Mike wants. Jewish, you can compound those two turbos. I don't know why you would. I remember back in the day we tried that with 2 Vortex superchargers, or somebody did. I was trying to remember who did that at West Tech. Somebody ran 2 of them, and it's not nearly as good as running 2 of them, compounding them like that, because you don't get the same flow rate as you do if you have 2 of them blowing in like in parallel. And I don't think you need to do that, because you're still having to have the exhaust flow to spool one of those turbos. Okay, Julie, so you were talking about the single overhead cam, the pre-Barra. Old boy, what advisor I'd tell you to tell me? I'm gonna have to go back and look here. Trying to scroll back and see what the comment was. I don't see it. So tell me what David had to say. I like David. He's a good guy. Oh, the draw-through cars aren't popular yet? Okay. Oh, David Weiser told me to tell you he has never lost a cam shootout. Can you please, Anthony wants to know, can you please explain oiling to the turbos or make a video specific to this? Do you need an external oil pump? You don't. We normally have pressurized oil from the motor feeding the turbo and then draining back down into the pan. You can have an external pump if you do a remote turbo, and then guys need to do that. And then what they do is have a remote pump that pumps it back up into the pan or into the valve cover or anywhere. But that's only necessary usually on a remote application. Let's see, Rob, TVS versus twin screw. There's not really a supercharger debate there for anybody that knows anything about those two superchargers. A twin screw Kenny Bell of a given displacement makes more power than a TVS does. There's no doubt about that. You can put it on any blower dyno and you'll see that that's the case. There's a lower charge temperature and there's less parasitic loss required to drive that twin screw supercharger. It has a lower discharge temperature. All of that stuff is true. The TVS is very good and it's really good for what they designed it for, but it's not a twin screw. Every time they evolve the Roots blower, they try to get it closer to a twin screw, but it's just not. It's not there yet. But again, and I told the guys at Kenny Bell, I said, look, if somebody comes out with a Roots blower like the TVS that can make 1,000 horsepower or more, I said, that's going to take 90 to 95% of the market because that's where it is. That's what guys want. And now this TVS 2650 and the Kong blower and all these ported versions of it will make even more than that. So they've taken a lot of that market because it's fairly inexpensive compared to a twin screw. So, for guys that want to make the maximum amount of power, they have bigger twin screws than that will make a lot more power than the 2650 will, just because it's not big enough and it has a limit to how fast you can spin it. After you spin it too fast, what happens is it destroys the stuff inside the blower and it abrades the coating and lots of bad things happen. But most of the guys out there are not running their motors for a minute or 2 minutes at a time that it takes to blow those up. They're also not going to 20,000 or more RPM for extended periods of time and running 20 plus pounds of boost because those blowers are not great at that. But as an absolute thing, as an engineering example, there's not really a comparison there. Can you blow through a quadrajet carburetor? I would think that you can. I've never actually seen it done. We've never done it. Yes, with a box, I guess if you enclosed it in the car enclosure so that everything is pressurized in it, that should work fairly well, like the Vortec enclosures they used to have. Is there an intake configuration using carburetors that will cure the air-fuel imbalance between cylinders? 6-pack tunnel ram dual quad. Yeah, there definitely is. Look at what the NASCAR guys did with their carbureted V8s running 500-mile races at 9,000 RPM at 900 horsepower. So yes, they can do that. There is a configuration that you can do to make, but you have to make it, and it does work though. Cubes means cubic inches displacement. Cams means cam. Boost means boost. Cubes are just cubic inches, just displacement. Everyone with a keyboard is the fastest blower. I haven't seen guys break the crankshafts on 5 liters very much. I have seen people wear back in the day, guys were wearing the front main bearing out because they had fixed tensioners on the Vortex and the different kinds of blowers, and they were just wrenching those things down, especially in Renegade and stuff. They were just wrenching those things down and putting as much tension on, and you could see usually the blower mount would deflect, but as soon as they started putting supports for the blower mounts and making thicker blower mounts, which we did back in the day, I even had guys made one for me out of carbon fiber, which was really cool. But as soon as they got that, and then putting the other way was to put the brace between the crank snout and the blower so that they wouldn't go together. All you were doing was tensioning the belt. And then, so that usually cured that. So I've seen that happen more on roots blower applications on small block and big block Chevys than I have on 5 liters. Is the FR500 intake made of magnesium? It is made of magnesium, and it is very light. Matthew, choosing the intake runner length is going to determine where you want that thing to make power at. So if you want high RPM, make it short. If you want low RPM, make it long. And if you want it in the middle, make it in the middle. Yeah, blue collar, you can do all of those subframe connectors and all that stuff, but obviously the right cage goes a long way towards making the chassis stiff. David can dribble small block Chevy engine blocks. You'd be a pretty big boy to be able to do that. Okay, guys, last question. Let me know what you guys are doing. Give me one more good question, then I'm out. I got a whole bunch of stuff I got to get going. I'm already working on actually a Honda turbo video, which would be cool. East, brand new subscriber, welcome. Refrigerated supercharger. Well, we did used to ice our superchargers before we would run them, and that made a difference in the power. Any benefit to keeping if VIM means variable intake manifold, then yes, there's definitely a benefit to having multiple runners with boost. The variable runner does the same thing NA as it does under boost. So as long as it will actuate at the right RPM and you get the right crossover, and it will do that under boost, then you'll definitely have benefits. Pineapple on pizza. My son, this is the last question. Should you put pineapple on pizza? You guys let me know. Chime in here. I'm saying no. And I love pineapple and I love pizza, but in my mind, they should be separate. My son loves pineapple on pizza, and I can understand why people like it, just like all the other opinions that people have. For me, no thanks. That's not for me. But I'll have pineapple on the side, and I would eat all of the pineapple that somebody could give me. One of my favorite things about going to Hawaii is actually that I get to go crazy and eat pineapple, whether it's on the sidecar for one of my drinks or it's just in the morning with toast and all the other good stuff. Big thumbs up for pineapple, but not on pizza. Thanks for watching, guys. I have to get going. Thanks for showing up. Make sure to go check out the video on the FR500 intake manifold because it's super cool. Magnesium, dual runner. Nothing but thumbs up. Thanks, guys.